Hello everyone, welcome back to the second episode of Pop Swap, discounting our little Halloween special. Today we're going to be talking about our recommendations that we had for each other last month and what we thought of each other's picks. What are we going to talk about first, Dean? Do you want to say hello?
Hello everybody, yeah, that's right. Should we give a bit of a spoiler warning maybe?
Absolutely, yes. So if you were not around for the first episode, we recommended two items to each other, two pop culture things to ingest. One was a comic, Y the Last Man. The other one was a movie, The Invisible Man. And we will be diving deep into spoiler territory. So if you want to avoid that annoyance, you can pause now, come back to us after you've inhaled said comic and movie. Or you could go back and listen to the first episode and then join us on our merry adventure here today.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah, that's the plan, isn't it? Because I guess this is the official launch, really, of the standard format of the podcast.
Yeah.
We couldn't quite do it with the first episode, and the Halloween was a bit of a change, a departure. So, yeah, if you've not checked out the first one, go back, start here, and you won't have anything spoiled.
Yeah, basically we're going to nail it this time. That's what we're saying. Dino, what do you want to chat about first? Do you want to...
Yeah, how did you enjoy The Invisible Man? Did you check it out, I take it?
Oh, yes, I did. You recommended quite a dark movie for me, sir.
I certainly did.
Yes, I had a miserable time and I loved it. There's nothing like a movie that makes you feel dreary and dead on the inside. I'm joking. I thought it was a really, really, really cool movie, and I tend to like Blumhouse Productions. They're one of my favorite movie production companies at the moment, and I think they give talent room to shine. And I think I really do like Lee Wannell as well. He's a director that I tend to enjoy, you know, Insidious and his other horror movies. But I thought from the get-go, the modern twist on this movie was quite clear. And, you know, how they were framing it as, okay, so essentially we have a couple and the character from the H.G. Wells novel and I think was there an old movie in the 50s?
James Whale, made the original for Universal, yeah.
So we have the optics professor person, mad scientist guy, and his girlfriend, clearly in an abusive relationship, and the entire movie is obviously from her perspective, which I enjoyed greatly. I thought So basically the premise is, for people who may not have seen it, or if you're joining us after watching it, obviously the protagonist has escaped an abusive relationship with this mad optics scientist person, and he has learned how to turn himself invisible. After she escapes, we seemingly learn that he has committed suicide, but strange things start to happen. We feel his presence around her, and eventually, of course, we learn that he has learned how to turn himself invisible, and he torments her. And it's a bit of an on-the-nose metaphor for trauma from abusive relationships and how they follow you around, but I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the modernization of the plot. It made it a bit more creative, even if it was a little not forced. I don't want to use that word, but definitely quite obvious. So I tend to enjoy subtle metaphors in film. This one was a pretty obvious one, but it worked for me. It worked.
Yeah, I feel like what I guess we call it like the popular term be like the Me Too sort of aspect of the plot could seem like quite trite and forced, like you say, but I thought it's really cleverly used. Like I thought it's really smartly handled 100%. The way they did that, because it subverts a few things. Like the original movie, like the Universal film. That's kind of. Have you seen that one, by the way? Sorry, the James Whale original.
When I was a kid, I barely remember it. Yeah.
Well, I love the fact that, like, this, for one, unlike a few of the remakes, sort of embraces the fact that it is from a heritage of actually being a horror film. So it is meant to be quite terrifying and sort of creepy to watch. But like the original sort of, in a way, is almost like a bit of a wish fulfillment movie. There's like a cheeky sort of humour to it, and it's still quite unsettling to watch. It's a very sort of sinister performance, the lead performance. He's like an anti-hero, the Invisible Man, in the original one, for anyone who hasn't seen it. And what this version really cleverly does, like you say, is it changes the protagonist from being the Invisible Man to being the victim of the Invisible Man. Yeah. So that's a really, really smart move, I think, because it sort of addresses the fact that you should feel slightly guilty about this sort of fantasy aspect of, oh, what could I do if nobody could see me? What kind of like grey moral lines could I cross?
Yeah,
and that's what the audience is doing when they watch the original Invisible Man. But what this very smartly does is it kind of makes you the victim of that individual as an audience member.
And watching the movie, you feel violated every time you get that creepy crawly shiver down your spine, especially that scene where she goes to stand outside and you see the breath, like the air, and you can see her breath, and then you can see this random breath just coming out of nowhere. That's so creepy, and it's honestly it is very timely. It may come across a little forced if you watch it in the current time, but it's a metaphor that works for me. And the way the movie handles it, it's brilliant. And the ending is a little bit of inverted wish fulfillment, you know? And just to go deep into spoilers right away, when she kills that fucker, I thrust my fist into the air. I was like, you go, girl. Power to you. Yeah,
it is very satisfying, isn't it? Definitely.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I also sort of like viewed it in a way that it's a really interesting take on the slasher movie as well, because in a way it's a slasher film with an invisible villain. Yeah, that's such a genius idea. I think that's the one thing that I loved about it, is like, even though I know like the original does have those horror aspects, but it never really, any of the versions that I can think that have been made never really sort of step into slasher territory too much.
Yeah.
And what I thought was really smart about this is it plays that brilliantly for lots of moments of suspense and lots of tension when you're watching things on screen, because the fact that you've got a typical sort of slasher-esque scenario playing out, but you have no idea within the room where the villain could be at any given time, just adds so much tension. It's such a great idea.
And then when you see a random floating knife, and in the moment I was like, why aren't you reacting to this? Because it was so slow, the movement of the knife, of any time the knife came up. I was like, why aren't you reacting to this? But in the moment you'd totally freeze, because you'd be like, what is happening here? You know? And then of course, slice of throat, there you go. But what I really enjoyed was that we barely got any scenes with the Invisible Man himself. I actually really liked it. And I felt it was possibly going down a road at the very end of leaving a hint of doubt in us that was it actually him the whole time. But it then swayed it back, and I'm not sure I would have liked had they stuck to that, because I didn't want him to be ambiguous, you know?
Or the brother to do it. Is it
That's
the brother?
It.
That would have been a cop-out as well, I think, if it would have just turned out to be the brother.
Yeah, so like full spoilers, she ends up shooting the Invisible Man. She gets him in this like climactic moment, and then she takes off the mask, and it's actually the brother lawyer who has been helping him, you know, essentially fuck over the protagonist for the entire movie. And it seemingly leads us to believe that he might have been in the suit the whole time and not the abusive boyfriend. But that ambiguity only really lasted for maybe 5 minutes for me, until she goes to visit him then in the house at the end. And you see it's really cleverly played, and it's brilliantly displayed as the apologetic, abusive, dickhead boyfriend, this control freak who is now trying to pamper her and be like all apologetic and tiptoe around her at the very end, you know? And then the flip, the change, that she has finally outsmarted him and she's finally one step ahead of him and fucking kills him. I love it.
Yeah, that stuff, all that stuff with the brother offering her things and him, like I just think like say it's got so many great things about just the idea of like that type of relationship where it's entirely about controlling the other individual and that individual getting satisfaction by the fact that like they have the control and they have the power all the time. Like say in the moment that the scales tip the other way and she kind of gets some sense of like her own willpower back again. It's like say, it's so satisfying watching that climax sort of play off.
And I thought as well, just again to kind of bring it back to sort of like, I hate to call these things political discussion or whatever, because I don't think having female protagonists is a political ideology. I just think it's common sense, you know. But it's very satisfying for the time, for just commentary on Hollywood itself, you know. So here we have a movie about the Invisible Man and how cool he must be, but no, not really, you know. And it's almost like it's a commentary itself on power in Hollywood, because this guy, the protagonist, is a really rich guy and he's got all this smart tech. He's a little bit like, possibly like Tony Stark or something, people that you would generally look up to as protagonists in film. But guy's a psycho, you know. And then the woman comes along who has been under his thumb for the entire film, and everybody thinks she's crazy. Nobody believes her. It's one giant metaphor for Me Too, for all these, you know, allegations that came out against, you know, powerful men in positions in Hollywood or in positions of power in Hollywood, and nobody believes the woman, and then the career is done, your life is over, whatever. That's what this woman goes through in this movie, you know? It's the same thing.
Yeah.
And
I think for someone to like Elizabeth Moss to have actually chosen that project, it says a lot, like about that script, how strong that script must have been for her to. Because I mean, it's not the typical vehicle like an actress like her you would expect. She doesn't need to jump into doing like some B movie kind of horror flick. Like that's not what the trajectory her career is going on. She's an incredible actress, and she could probably take her pick of plenty of projects out there. I think the fact that she chose that. Says it all, really. Like, I mean, she carries the whole film brilliantly as well. I thought she's great in it.
Definitely, yeah, she's brilliant. And I like that we only get like one or two lines from the Invisible Man himself, and by the time you do meet him, you're like, nah, you creep me out. I don't like you at all. I don't believe a word you're saying. It's good, you know. So I really, really, really enjoyed it. And it was reminding me of, it's slipping my mind now. Anyway. What I was going to say earlier was that I tend to hate when our protagonist, not that I hate it, I actually really like it because it really engages me, but I hate when the protagonist of a movie knows something or is experiencing something and nobody believes them. It's the most frustrating thing, and everybody thinks the person is crazy because of course you wouldn't believe that an invisible man is stalking you. Like it's grating. But you take a step back and you're like, okay, this has been the experience of a lot of women in these positions, you know? And it just drives home then the message of the movie, you know?
Yeah, 100%, yeah.
So the way you feel, the frustration that you feel watching it is 100% intentional and really, really clever, you know? Instead of just, you know, Leonardo DiCaprio is on an island. Is he crazy? We don't know. It's a bit more playful, you know, in that, with that sense. But this one, there's a real, I guess, learning curve for it, you know? And I do think as well that in terms of the content of the movie, it could be a potentially difficult thing for a woman to watch. So me and my girlfriend sat down to watch it, and I think she watched the first 15 minutes and was like, nope, don't really want to watch this movie, you know? Because it's a kind of horror film that is real, that is absolutely plausible and very topical and very timely, and it was like, she just got up, left the room. It was like, no, this isn't happening, you know? And I think a lot of possibly women would have that reaction to it, especially if you've been in a relationship like that, you know? But again, it's another strength of the film, you know?
And hopefully not a lot of people from the other side, not a lot of men have kind of and say men, but not a lot of people have kind of just dismissed it, thinking like, oh, this is going to be some kind of like, trite kind of overtly political message, sort of Me Too type of thing, and they're just like, oh, I don't need to see that. The Invisible Man's not even in it. If that's your attitude, then I'm sorry, but you're a bit of an idiot because you're missing out on a really fantastic film.
Get your head checked. If that's your mentality on the thing, no, it's just that's being a little bit short-sighted to make an optical pun.
Very good.
Let's talk about my recommendation for you, Dino. What did I recommend to you, and how did you get on with
it? You recommended to me the comic series Y: The Last Man.
Oh, indeed, I did.
Yeah, which was great. Really, really loved that. Not necessarily any cheerier than our last subject matter, really. The gist for everybody. So a plague wiping the earth, and all the males dying out, and all the females left to survive, with the exception of a gentleman called Yorick and his little primate partner, a little monkey called Ampersand, who are the only male survivors on the planet, it seems. And they have to kind of walk the earth. Yorick is searching for his lost love, Beth, who at the start we discover she's in Australia at the time that the plague hits. So that kind of sets him off on a little mission to wander around the earth and try and survive, hiding the fact that he's alive from most of the female population, and try and relocate Beth with the help of some friends. That's the general gist.
That is his quest. He goes on his hero's quest to find his girl, and learns a lot about himself and girls in the process.
He does, just great relationships in it between the characters and stuff, like especially between him and the way, I don't know, maybe I'll be reaching the ending too quickly by going into that, but the relationship between Agent 355, she's called 350, isn't she? That's kind of like her nickname.
350,
just their relationship together is great. Just the way that friendship develops and then sort of blossoms into something slightly different as it carries on.
Until we reach
Alison.
heartbreak.
Definitely full on.
Utter heartbreak.
And Alison, I think Dr. Alison Mann, she was one of my favourite characters in it. I thought she was a really, really great character.
Interesting name for a character there, Brian K. Vaughan. Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah, definitely.
It's becoming quite a feminist episode, this, isn't it? I didn't realise
it. It is, actually. No, I think we subconsciously have done this.
Yeah.
But neither of us were setting out to do this from the outset. But it seems so. I never actually thought of that until now.
Yeah. Did you enjoyed it anyway?
Yeah, I did. I loved it. I'm trying to think. I've made myself some little bullet points here of sort of highlighted moments and things just to keep my memory fresh with it. But I've got a note here saying astronauts. So
the Russian astronauts, was it?
Yeah, during the opening, actually, because I was thinking to myself during the opening of the story where there's a brief mention. I think they kind of cut to a scene where you're at like NASA HQ or something, and you see them talking. At least you hear it on the communication on the radio between people that are up in space, and the astronauts communicating back and forth. And I was thinking to myself, like, oh, wait a minute, are they alive? Because I was thinking at the time, okay, so if they're alive, is this something that has only affected males on the planet, or is it affected? Like, how far does this go? In that case, what's the cause? Because I do like as it plays out that the cause of the plague, though it's kind of intrigues you, it isn't necessarily the purpose or the point of the story by any means.
It's a total MacGuffin to me. I don't even, like, and I'll be honest with you, I finished reading the book a while ago now, and I do not remember what caused the plague, and I don't care because it's not what the story was about to me. You know?
Yeah. Well, I could get to that in a bit, actually, a bit further on, because I got a note about that because I was curious about it myself. Another thing I enjoyed were the Daughters of the Amazon as characters. They were cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder how much research you did on like that, like the idea of like removing the breast and stuff like that being done breast. As like part of a ritual. Is that something that Amazons in tribes did traditionally? I'm just curious, like how much that is artistic license and how much that is.
I have no idea, but my guess,
grounded in history.
My personal guess with that one was obviously Brian K. Vaughan, being a massive comic book nerd, wanted to play with the idea of the Amazons in Wonder Woman on their own little island of, matriarchy, basically. I think he was just playing around with that. But again, I don't know. Right. That's just speculation.
Yeah. And that's where we kind of get to know Hero, isn't it? Like his sister, we kind of get introduced to her through them, and the fact that she's joined them, and she is I can't even remember. I forget the name of the leader of the Amazons, but yeah, she's kind of like her sort of right hand woman.
Yeah, she's like grooming her to be the next leader, next cult. Messiah.
And that leads to an incident in I knew I'd forget names here, so I've written it down. Marysville Prison, is it? Where that's the
female prison.
That's the most sort of Walking Dead-esque scenario where like the women are there in the prison. The women are there in what seems like a refuge, and then it turns out they're ex-convicts, and that kind of gets revealed. I thought that's a very Walking Dead kind of like revelation.
Yeah, they populate this little town. And it seems that they've got a little mini society running for themselves, and they're all quite organized and yada yada yada. And we obviously find out that they had all escaped from the female prison that's a few miles down the road or whatever. I enjoyed the fact that not all of the characters were good. It sounds like a really simple, silly thing to say, but the book could have become very preachy about like anti-patriarchy and this kind of stuff, which it was a little bit, but it was more highlighting hypocrisies and highlighting things that we take seriously as a species, not just men, but women too. Things that we take seriously, that we shouldn't take seriously, and things that are wrong with how we run society. And it showed that I've seen some people talk about it in that the fact, okay, why are we making this feminist book with a male lead, and is the commentary just saying women will rule the world better? It wasn't like that at all. What I got from it was like, okay, if you give it complete control to one or the other, you'll fuck it up either way, Yeah. And I liked that the book did that. That there were just as many crazy bitches as there are crazy dudes running shit around the place,
Because I think there's two parallels between, like, for me, like, as it all plays out, and that's why I kind of mentioned that moment, that scene, because something very key happens there, I think, that also later on there's another scene that I'll mention afterwards. But during that scene, the moment where Hero kills the woman that at that stage Yorick is kind of having this thing with, and she commits that act, and his reaction to that just deeply affecting him and their relationship from that moment on, and that plays throughout the rest of the story, really. And like there's like a scene later on where he's facing the Sons of Arizona and he has to kill that woman. They have a confrontation, and then Yorick shoots her. And I think those two things are very deliberate, that the sister and the brother both experienced that, and that by the end, because I think it's quite a moving, sort of sad, very poignant ending to that story, that they are both deeply like scarred and changed for life after those moments play out. Like, unlike a lot of stories where that kind of thing might just be brushed over and the characters kind of recover from it afterwards. I love the way that story kind of developed itself and ended, because he is completely broken and sort of a traumatized man by the time that story ends. And there's that brief flashback to him meeting his sister a few years later as well, when he's got his head shaved and he meets her in the desert later, and she's
5 years later or something.
Yeah, and you can tell they're still not right. They're like still communicating with one another, but they'll never kind of forgive each other for that. And he won't forgive himself for that. And you talking about the idea that like, what's the message of the story really on that feminist sort of bent? And I agree that I think it's that thing of, well, both sides of society, if can take the wrong steps, and you can cross the line no matter if you're a male or a female, and you can't just inherently kind of push all of the negative qualities onto one sex than the other, just because throughout the reputation of history, men have been responsible for more war and murders and killings. It doesn't mean that suddenly were women to take charge, they wouldn't go exactly the same way. And I think that's quite a fair sort of comment that the story makes.
Yeah, exactly. And I think some people had issues with that. Like, I was reading reviews for it when I read the book, and people did have issues with it, saying it was actually sexist to suggest such a thing, you know, which to me is ridiculous. It feels like a natural human thing, you know, to be that primal and tribal and violent, you know, especially in a situation like that. But apart from all the kind of deeper, heady, weighty stuff, it's also a surprisingly hilarious book.
Oh, yeah,
for a lot of
it
is. It is hilarious. I was laughing out loud reading some dialogue, you know. And the main character, I was going to ask you, did you like him at the start?
No, I didn't. I actually remember, like, when I was starting this story, saying to you and another friend that we have that thinking like, this guy's a bit of a cocky dick.
Yeah,
like,
he's an
asshole.
asshole.
I don't like him very much. Like, he's kind of annoying. And then as it carried on, I was like, actually, he's growing on me. And then as it developed even further, I was like, I like this guy. This guy's decent. Like, I misunderstood him. And I think I kind of sometimes prefer characters like that.
100%.
Where it takes the work. What was it now? There was an Amazon comedy series that had started recently enough by the director of Parks and Recs, I think, called Upload.
Oh, yeah.
And
yeah,
you were telling me. I started watching that, and the protagonist in that, same sort of thing, like very smarmy, cocky, sort of, not so much in the sense of like Yorick in this, but more so like this guy's more kind of like a Johnny Bravo type of sort of like really vain, kind of up himself sort of figure.
Yeah.
And as the story plays out, like you start to see a different side of him, and you start to realise that some of that's an act. And he's as vulnerable as anybody else. And you really, really love him by the time that series is over. Yeah. Like, he's a really likeable character. And this is the same with Yorick in this. Like, I think it's a great sort of like arc that he develops for him.
Exactly, yeah. And the thing that I think I got from it was, okay, so here's this guy who is essentially living the 15-year-old dream of being surrounded by women and you're the only man alive, you know? And he behaves like that at the beginning because that's how you would behave with it at surface level, just thinking about it plainly like that, you know? And he has this macho, making jokey, joke maker kind of thing going on, you know? And then as you obviously peel back the layers and he peels back the layers and he gets a bit more experience and he talks and converses with these humans, he grows as a person and, you know, starts to just shed that facade or that like front that he has of, you know, bravado and to use the term fucking toxic masculinity, you know?
Yeah.
But it's done in a very kind of genuine human way, you know? So by the end of it, he's equally as vulnerable as any of the women in the book. They tend to be tougher than he is, which I also like. And he just comes across as a super genuine, vulnerable guy, you know? Who was trying
I love the ongoing gag, sorry, but I love that kind of ongoing sort of gag at the start from him that like any time he sort of mention any interactions with women or when they sort of encounter him, discover who he is, like he just has that kind of gut reaction that he thinks he's going to be somehow like sexually assaulted that moment or something. Like he's just expecting that people want to jump on him immediately, and it's like, get over yourself. Like, you kidding?
Yeah, stop it. Yeah. But it's brilliant commentary on just the psychological differences between men and women in those situations, you know. But yeah, what did you think of the ending? My
note here is very sad ending. Yorick escapes. That's what I've written. But yeah, just I tend to really enjoy the end of a story where we flash forward.
Yeah.
Or we're at the end of a person's life. I don't know why. I guess it's just my morbid curiosity about death or something. But I always find when stories end with characters at that time in their lives, it just adds a certain kind of like emotional weight that wasn't there before. And it changes the tone quite drastically, I think, of the rest of the story, the way it goes. But it just adds to it, I think.
That feels complete then, you know?
It does, yeah.
It feels a bit more complete.
when he gets visited by, who is it, like Yorick the 17th or something, his clone.
Yeah.
Such a great idea for him, like that as an excuse to put those sort of what then become flashbacks in to the gaps between that you've just missed when you've suddenly like jumped so immediately from like one timeline to the next. But I just thought it's really, really poignant, really sad, him sort of escaping at the end there. It's quite beautiful in a way though as well. I did love the fact that it like opens with the idea that there's this escape artist and he's kind of he's escaped, he's cheated the death of every other man on the planet and he's escaped that, and his kind of life closed. I kind of watched the story in a way that I thought that was his way of somehow visualizing in a way that wasn't obvious that may be the end of that character's life.
Mm-hmm.
That the kind of visual metaphor of like the straight jacket kind of like flayed out in the wind at the end of the beautiful sort of like image of it. It's in a Y, isn't it? Its arms are sort of stretched in the air and it kind of forms a Y as it floats in the air, and it says alas as like alas poor Yorick as like the last word that's written in the story. I just thought that was a really, with it looking up to the clouds as well. Like, I mean, I'm not sure how much of a religious man he is. I'm probably guessing not too much, but I just felt like the fact that it is focus is on the clouds, and that's the final moment, and he's kind of escaped life almost. Is how I sort of like took that last image and thought this is the death of Yorick possibly. Yeah, but
that's how I read it.
We don't need to see it.
That's how I read it. Yeah,
it's a beautiful ending.
It's really, really good.
Yeah, the plague itself though. What was your theory? Because you say you couldn't quite remember it. I actually there are moments where it plays out where the implication is that Alison's father was responsible.
Yeah.
And the creation of the clones caused this kind of, I can't remember what they describe it as. It's some like symbiotic kind of like spread of, it's like when a certain group of creatures like experience a dramatic change in the species, and that, I can't think of the term. What's the word?
You know what I thought it was originally? I thought it was like all the men or something, after this clone is created, after Alison Mann's father does his or creates the clone, I think, didn't he create the first clone or something like that? That somehow all the men kind of feel like Yoda after Order 66 in Star Wars, where it's just there's a disturbance in the Force and then they all just croak it. That's how I interpreted it, but I was like, I don't even care.
Well, I think the science of it was meant to be the rough science of it. I mean, I don't understand it too much anyway. But what I was thinking it was hinting at is that due to the nature of the fact that men are no longer needed because now we can clone, like nature's reaction was to suddenly decide that all the males were redundant, and that spread, and the only thing that prevented Yorick from experiencing that was the interaction with Ampersand and his feces being injected with the stuff in the lab that helped sort of prevent him from being affected. But then there's a moment later where it gets mentioned after the tragic death of 350, which is, I was going to say, more so than that ending, just for me, like the most emotionally sort of like heavy moment and gutted moment was when they kind of have that moment, especially preceded by the fact that you get Beth being honest about the fact that she was going to dump him before the story started. And then him going back to her and the shot ringing out and just the look on the character's face there as she sort of falls to the ground and him reacting. I just thought that whole bit was played out brilliantly.
Which I wanted to mention as well. You brought up Beth. Basically, he finds her at the end and she tells him, I was going to dump you all along. I love when stories do that. I love when stories take you on this epic quest or saga or something. Speaking of saga, same writer, great book. But I love when stories set you up with a basic quest and then, okay, you have a fun time, and then they complete their quest by the end of the book, and it feels nice and it's a good story, but you may not remember it in a few months, you know? Whereas I like when a story does this, where you're set up on the quest, you spend so much time on the quest and you grow with the character and you learn new things with the character that eventually the quest doesn't really matter ultimately, and you can see he's not that beat up by the end of it, you know, because he's grown as a person.
Yeah, it's the journey, not the destination. That's the cliche, isn't it?
Yeah.
100%.
And I just enjoy when stories do that, when they shift your focus a little bit from what the formula, the important thing is in the formula, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, because there is a mention of after her death of another reason for the plague being that the Americans had done it as a political move against the Chinese to stop their males from breeding, and that it had a chain reaction and caused like a tragic event across the entire globe to occur, and that 350 had been going along trying to cover up the tracks of the evidence of that event. So it could be that either was true throughout the whole thing.
Yeah.
But because I was trying to think how that would work with all the stuff with Alison and her dad then but I think from their point of view, if that was the case, then they would have been oblivious to the fact that that's what they probably timed it so that if they were to have done that as a government organisation, they did it at the time where they had a cover story, which would have been to have waited for the first clone child to be born and then to have released it.
Yeah.
As a means to kind of like cover their own story. But I don't know. The stuff with the IDF, like that, I enjoyed that aspect of it. And I mean, they made an interesting sort of, I guess they aren't really villains because they're not really villains in this story, are they? But
yeah,
I guess they're trying to think of like who could be the grand antagonist against Yorick or something, and the fact that it is like who are like the most militarized sort of race of women out there.
Yeah.
And so the Israeli Defense Force are going to be the choice for him as a writer to sort of choose them. And that was interesting, but I felt like some of that stuff didn't engage me necessarily as much as the rest of the story.
There were some subplots that I kind of lost interest in, and I don't even remember now. Like I wouldn't quite remember everything that the IDF soldier goes through, especially the one that we spend the most time with. I can't remember her name now.
Alta, I think her name is.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
But again, I felt like obviously this was a 60-issue run, and that was another thing I wanted to ask as well. How did you find the reading experience of reading it and not waiting for each chapter monthly like people did when it originally came out? Do you think you would have had a different experience with it, spending 6 years with it, you know?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, from my perspective, my experience of reading comics is that type of experience generally anyway. Yeah. I've never been the type of person to experience comics through like the waiting of the release of an issue and like being that loyal to kind of like go along sort of like month by month or whatever. But I've always experienced them in kind of like ready to go, sit and binge form. So
instant gratification.
Yes, I only accept instant gratification and nothing else.
I do not have the patience to wait for things here, Dean. This is why I have Netflix and Amazon Prime now. I think because for me, at times when we were getting towards the end, I found some of the time jumps a bit jolty, and it was a bit jarring. I didn't quite know sometimes. Right, so when are we now? Hold on, I had to kind of flip back. Because I have the story in that massive tome with all 60 issues, all 1,500 pages in one book. And I read it in a few days, you know. So I inhaled the story within less than a week, you know. Whereas I know some people had been maybe waiting for the paperback editions of, like, I think there's 5 of them. So maybe reading them every year or something. Or the real comic nerds, aficionados who bought the single issues once a month for 6 years or however long it was. I can't imagine doing that. I've never really done that, and I've read comics, you know. I'm usually one who waits for the physical collected edition books to come out. But I would wonder, would the experience be different reading it over that space of time? Would the journey itself be more impactful if you spent more time with it, you know?
And I'll best mention it because you mentioned it when you made the selection before, but there's excitingly a TV series of this coming along, isn't there?
There is indeed, yeah.
Yeah, that'll be cool. I'm really looking forward to that.
Unfortunately, the the young man, my young fellow countryman who was cast in the lead role, Barry Keoghan, he had to drop out.
Right. So that's why I was seeing him on a search. Because I was actually very excited because I saw who is cast as Yorick, and I love the actor that they've cast.
He is great, but apparently there's some sort of scheduling conflict and he had to drop out like a month or two ago, I think it was. So they are currently without an actor for Yorick. But I think it's all
really?
written, I think.
That's where I'm confused because like I saw the actor that you mentioned, the Irish actor.
Yeah, Barry Keoghan, yeah.
I know who you mean. Like I've seen him in quite a few films and TV and stuff, and he is brilliant. But I'm excited because of who I currently see casted, which is a guy called Ben Schnetzer.
Oh, so they did find somebody else. I'm not up to date.
So he was anything I've seen him in, he has just stolen the film. Like he's so good. He's one of the programmers that Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character meets in the movie Snowden. He's brilliant in that. And he's one of the wizards. Again, he's like just 10 times better than the movie itself. In the World of Warcraft, he was in that as well, and he steals that. And he's in a really great British film, a small film called Pride, which is kind of like about the mining community and like a gay protesters meeting together to go on a march and stuff. And sorry, that's a very terrible description of the movie Pride, but it's a great film, and he's brilliant in it. And the Riot Club.
He was in the Harry Kubert Affair miniseries, I think. Did you watch that?
Okay, I've never seen that, no.
You should give that a go.
Cool,
That's good.
I'll check that out. But yeah, he's brilliant. I've absolutely loved him in anything I've seen him in, and I'm very excited that they would have cast him because, like, to me, he's a total chameleon. Like, he's one of those actors who is like just immediately charismatic in any role that he's in, and embodies the character as well brilliantly.
Yeah, so it's going to be a show on FX, and it's just called Y. And I am pretty sure last time I checked a couple of months ago that it was all written and they're ready to go. I don't know if they're just filming the pilot. I don't know if it's like full series ordered already, but I'm just excited to see it adapted on, especially as a TV show. I wouldn't want to see it as a movie, I don't think, because there's way too much stuff to pack in there.
Yeah, you can't do it. Yeah, I don't think it's doable. A little spin-off that I would have loved to have seen was the you meet these characters really briefly in one scene. They're called The Last Girls or something, I think. Little group of teenage girls that are going around. They like steal their car at one stage.
I don't remember that.
Do you not? They kind of like stick them up at one stage, and they're just like these girls that are wandering around Los Angeles, and they just think they're going to be like really vulnerable and stuff, and they just turn out to be a bunch of badasses, and they just fuck them over and disappear. But they're just like a cool little gang of girls, and I just thought like that'd be fun. I'd like to see a little Last Girls spin-off.
I don't know. Have you read Paper Girls?
I've not. No.
So it's not going to be my recommendation this time because I have another thing in my head. But so Brian K. Vaughan, for anybody who doesn't know, right, I'll give everybody a little bit of a background on Brian K. Vaughan. He's one of my favorite writers, right? He kind of made his name as a comic book writer, but made it big time as one of the main writers for Lost. Now, think what you want about Lost. Lost is one of my favorite TV shows, so that's all good in my books. But he also wrote quite possibly one of the most critically acclaimed comic series of all time, Saga. And then another small one that he wrote was Paper Girls, which came out before Stranger Things, I might add, and is very Stranger Things-y. So it's for young teenage girls, maybe like between 13 and 15 or something, who I think there's a new girl in town and she's just joining their paper route, as Americans would say. So they're throwing paper into people's front gardens in the 1980s, right? Really, you can already imagine the kind of tone and vibe of it. Very, again, full of pop culture references and, all that funky, fun 80s stuff. It's kind of why I like Brian K. Vaughan as a writer. He does a lot of that in his writing. But Paper Girls, I thought, is what Stranger Things should have been. Because the first season of Stranger Things, I thought was great. Second season, I'm like, okay, it's good. I enjoy it. Please come up with something new. And by whatever we're on now, season 4, something like we're beating a dead horse here now, But Paper Girls is cool. You should give it a read if you liked Y and Saga.
Well, I accidentally came across Brian K. Vaughan before. Like, I wouldn't have been until recently that you were making recommendations with Saga and the other things. But like when you mentioned that, and I did check out Saga prior to this.
Yeah.
I'd accidentally a couple of years before stumbled across a webcomic called The Private Eye.
Oh, Private Eye,
I really enjoyed.
Yeah.
And I read that and I had no idea that it was him at all until like having a chat with you and a friend about him as a writer and all the stuff that he'd done. And then I looked back and was like, oh, no way, he actually wrote that,
so versatile.
That comic as well.
He's so versatile. There's one book of his that I haven't read. I know we're going on a bit of a tangent here, but there's one book of his that I haven't read yet that I want to read. Is actually called Ex Machina. No relation to the movie whatsoever. It came out about 20 years ago. It came out post 9/11 and it's quite a political comic, so I hear. I haven't read it yet, but they're also adapting that into a movie, funnily enough, with Oscar Isaac. But they're not calling it Ex Machina.
Has that in his contract.
Yeah.
Only star in movies with the title Ex Machina.
I think they changed the title for the film to The Great Machine or something. And that's another one that I want to read. And I hear it's a little controversial. It's a bit, controversial. Politically driven. And of course, anything political will be a bit controversial. And Brian K. Vaughan isn't one to mince words in his dialogue either. So I'm kind of excited to read that as well. Cool. So to wrap up the show for today, obviously going forward, Dean, we agreed that we're going to take turns swapping each show.
Yeah, we're less greedy with our choices, less choices for you listeners.
Yeah, so we have more time then to talk about each individual pick that we have each month, and we decided this month for the next show, I will recommend something to you. And just for a little bit of variety, a little bit of a challenge too, to get it done in a month if you have time, I'm going to suggest a nice old novel for you, Dean.
Oh, okay.
It is one of my favourite books. It's not a work of art by any stretch of the imagination, but it's one of my favourite writers, and it's definitely my cup of tea. And it's called Recursion by Blake Crouch.
Okay.
And to give you a little bit of info or deets on it, I'm just going to read the blurb. My son has been erased. Those are the last words the woman tells Barry Sutton before she leaps from the Manhattan rooftop. Deeply unnerved, Barry begins to investigate her death, only to learn that this wasn't an isolated case. All across the country, people are waking up to lives different from the ones they fell asleep to. Are they suffering from false memory syndrome, a mysterious new disease that afflicts people with vivid memories of a life they had never lived? Or is something far more sinister behind the fracturing of reality all around him? Miles away, neuroscientist Helena Smith is developing a technology that allows us to preserve our most intense memories and relive them. If she succeeds, anyone will be able to re-experience a first kiss or the birth of a child. Barry's search for truth leads him on an impossible, astonishing journey as he discovers that Helena's work has yielded a terrifying gift.
Cool.
So,
I like the sound of that.
This
getting Philip K. Dick vibes and
definitely 100%
Charlie Kaufman-esque.
Yeah, very
vibes as well, yeah.
Very sci-fi, very multiple reality possible thing going on, and definitely my cup of tea. Blake Crouch, for one, is the writer of the Wayward Pines trilogy of novels.
Okay.
Which was adapted into a TV show starring, what is his name? Matt Dillon? Is that his name?
Okay.
Which was also very futuristic, dystopia type sci-fi. And yeah, it's a very quick read. Hopefully it doesn't put you under too much pressure now coming up to Christmas. For most people.
Listeners, if you're anything like me, I'm a very slow reader, but I will try my best to squeeze that in before our next episode for you, and hopefully you'll manage to do the same as well.
Splendid. I hope you enjoy it.
Brilliant. Yeah,
cool.
Will do. Look forward to reading that. We'll get it done in time, as said.
We'll see. We're coming up to Christmas.
Yeah. And who knows? I keep mentioning specials at the end of things these days, but
we have to do a Christmas special.
Maybe a Christmas special.
Yeah.
Possibly not as long as our other specials, but we'll squeeze something in for you.
We have to talk about Die Hard and Home Alone and the Santa Claus and
definitely.
Jingle All the Way. My Turbo Man. So we'll leave it there for another month, for another show. Thanks again for listening, guys. I hope you can join us and read the novel. We'll see you again in a month's time, possibly for a Christmas special.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.